The gunshot echoed across the plains as Samuel Wright crouched behind a large boulder, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. The outlaw gang that had been hunting him for 3 days had finally caught up, and his ammunition was running dangerously low. The year was 1875, and in the vast, unforgiving territory of Wyoming, a man's life often hung by the thinnest of threads. The last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains as Samuel checked his Colt revolver, 2 bullets left, not enough to take on 4 determined men. His horse had been shot out from under him that morning, forcing him to continue on foot through the rugged terrain. His once pristine brown leather vest was now torn and dirty, matching the state of his weather-beaten face. "Wright, we know you're out there." The voice of Jed Turner, the gang's leader, carried across the darkening landscape. "Ain't no use in hiding. You stole from the wrong men," Samuel grimaced. He hadn't stolen anything. He'd won that money fair and square in a poker game in Laramie. But men like Turner didn't take kindly to losing, especially to a drifter cowboy like him. A storm was brewing on the horizon, dark clouds gathering ominously. Samuel needed shelter and fast. As the first drops of rain began to fall, he spotted a small structure in the distance, a church, its white steeple barely visible in the gathering gloom. With the gang momentarily distracted by the worsening weather, Samuel made his move, darting from boulder to boulder, making his way toward the church. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the dusty ground to mud, obscuring his tracks. By the time he reached the small wooden building, Samuel was soaked to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. The church appeared abandoned, its windows dark, but the door yielded to his push, swinging open on creaking hinges. The interior was illuminated briefly by a flash of lightning, revealing simple wooden pews, a modest altar, and to Samuel's surprise, a woman curled up on one of the back benches, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Samuel froze, water dripping from his clothes onto the worn floorboards. The woman didn't stir. Moving cautiously closer, he could see that she was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with copper-colored hair spilling out from beneath her shawl. Her face was pale and drawn with exhaustion, but even in sleep, there was a quiet dignity to her features. It was only when she shifted slightly that Samuel noticed her condition, the pronounced swell of her belly beneath the blanket. She was with child, and from the size of her, not far from her time. Another flash of lightning illuminated the church, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that shook the very foundations. The woman's eyes flew open, wide with fear as she struggled to sit up, one hand protectively covering her belly. "Easy now," Samuel said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I didn't mean to startle you." The woman's eyes, a startling shade of green, darted around the church before settling on him. She clutched the blanket tighter around herself. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. "Name's Samuel Wright, madam, just looking for shelter from the storm." He deliberately left out the part about being pursued by armed men. "Didn't expect to find anyone here." She studied him carefully, taking in his soaked clothing, the gun holstered at his side, the weariness etched into his face. Whatever she saw seemed to ease her fears somewhat. "I'm Temperance," she said after a moment. "Temperance Wells." Samuel nodded, respecting her decision not to share more. Out here in the territories, everyone had their reasons for keeping their stories to themselves. Another burst of thunder rattled the windows, and in the distance, Samuel thought he heard voices. The gang hadn't given up. "Miss Wells," he said urgently, moving closer to her, "I don't think this place is safe. There are men outside who, well, they don't have friendly intentions toward me, and this building won't offer much protection if they decide to search it." Temperance's hand tightened over her belly, her eyes filling with a new fear. "I can't move quickly," she said, gesturing to her condition. "And I have nowhere else to go." Samuel made a quick decision. "There's a homestead I passed about 2 miles back. Looked abandoned, but it had solid walls and a root cellar. You'll wake somewhere safer than this, I promise you that." He expected resistance, arguments, but instead, Temperance simply nodded, as if she'd grown accustomed to making difficult choices. "Help me up," she said, extending a slender hand. Samuel took it, noting the roughness of her palm against his own calloused skin. This wasn't a woman who'd led an easy life. He helped her to her feet, steadying her as she swayed slightly. "Can you ride?" he asked. She gave him a small, wry smile. "When necessary. My horse is gone, so we'll have to go on foot. Stay close to me, and if I tell you to hide, you do it without question. Understood?" Temperance nodded, gathering her few possessions, the blanket and a small cloth bundle, and wrapping her shawl more securely around her shoulders. Samuel checked outside, scanning the darkness for any sign of Turner and his men. The rain was still coming down in sheets, visibility poor, which worked in their favor. He gently guided Temperance out the back door of the church, supporting her with one arm around her waist. They moved slowly through the rain, staying close to whatever cover they could find. Samuel was acutely aware of Temperance's labored breathing, the way she occasionally winced and pressed a hand to the small of her back. But she never complained, never asked to stop. The abandoned homestead came into view just as the first light of dawn began to break through the storm clouds. It was a simple structure, a log cabin with a sagging porch and boarded windows, but it would provide better shelter than the church. Samuel helped Temperance inside, quickly checking each room to ensure they were alone. The cabin consisted of a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and the root cellar he'd mentioned. The furniture was sparse but serviceable: a table, a few chairs, a bed frame with no mattress. "It's not much," Samuel admitted, "but it's defensible." Temperance sank onto one of the chairs, water dripping from her sodden clothes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I wouldn't have lasted much longer in that church." Samuel nodded, then set about making the place more habitable. He found dry wood stacked in a lean-to behind the cabin and soon had a small fire going in the fireplace. The warmth spread slowly through the room, bringing life back into their chilled bodies. As dawn broke fully, Samuel ventured outside cautiously, retrieving water from the well and checking for any sign of pursuit. When he returned, he found Temperance had spread her blanket near the fire to dry and was attempting to comb through her damp hair with her fingers. "No sign of those men," he told her, setting down the bucket of water. "I think the storm threw them off our trail." Temperance nodded, relief evident in her eyes. Then, without warning, she gasped, clutching at her belly. Samuel was at her side in an instant. "What is it, the baby?" She shook her head, breathing deeply as the pain passed. "No, not yet, just practicing. My mother would have called it, but it won't be long now." The realization of what that meant settled over Samuel like a weight. He was a cowboy, a drifter. He knew horses and cattle, cards and guns. He knew nothing about bringing a child into the world. "Is there a town nearby, someone who could help?" Temperance asked, reading his expression correctly. "Silver Creek is about a day's ride east," Samuel said, "but I don't think you should be traveling in your condition." Temperance's face fell. "Then I suppose it will just be the two of us," she said with remarkable calm. "God has brought us together for a reason, Mr. Wright. I have to believe that." Her faith, simple and unquestioning, stirred something in Samuel that he'd thought long buried. He'd left such beliefs behind years ago, after the war, after all he'd seen and done. "I'll do what I can to help you, Miss Wells," he promised. "But first we need to make this place more secure and find you some dry clothes." For the next few hours, Samuel worked to fortify the cabin, repairing the broken door, clearing sightlines around the property, setting up simple alarms that would warn of approach. All the while, he kept a watchful eye on Temperance, who had found a trunk of abandoned clothing in the bedroom and was altering a dress to fit her expanded frame. As the day progressed, Samuel learned bits and pieces of her story. She was 22, widowed. Her husband had died in a mining accident 6 months earlier. She'd been traveling to her cousin's home in Oregon when her stagecoach was robbed. The other passengers had been killed, but the bandits had left her, assuming a pregnant woman would soon perish on her own. "I walked for 3 days before finding that church," she explained as they shared a meager meal of beans and hardtack from Samuel's provisions. "I thought I might rest there until the baby came, then figure out what to do next." "And the baby's father?" Samuel asked hesitantly. "No other family who might be looking for you," a shadow crossed Temperance's face. "My husband was all I had. His family blamed me for his death, said if I hadn't been expecting, he wouldn't have taken that dangerous job in the mine." Samuel felt a surge of anger at the injustice. "That's not right," he said firmly. "A man does what he must to provide for his family." Temperance smiled sadly. "I tell myself William is watching over us from heaven, that he'll guide me in raising our child right." The simple faith in her words moved Samuel deeply. He'd seen too much darkness in the world to believe in such things anymore, but he envied her certainty. As night fell, Samuel prepared a makeshift bed for Temperance near the fire, using his saddle blanket and her now dry blanket to create some comfort on the hard floor. He would take the first watch, sitting by the window with his Colt in hand. "You should try to rest," he told her. "Tomorrow I'll see about hunting some fresh meat, maybe finding some supplies in the root cellar." Temperance settled herself as comfortably as possible, her hand absently stroking her belly. "May I ask what brings you out here alone, Mr. Wright? You don't strike me as a man who's running from the law." Samuel considered his answer carefully. "No, not the law. Just some men who don't like losing at poker. I was heading to Silver Creek to meet up with a cattle drive heading to Kansas City." "A cowboy," she said with a small smile. "My father was a cowboy before he settled down with my mother. He used to tell me stories of the trail drives, the open skies, the freedom of it." "It's not always as romantic as the stories make out," Samuel said dryly. "Long days, longer nights, bad food, and worse company sometimes. But still, to go where you please, to live by your own rules." Temperance's eyes grew distant. "There's something to be said for that kind of liberty." Samuel watched her as she drifted off to sleep, her face softened by the firelight, one hand still protectively covering her unborn child. She was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way, with a strength that ran deep beneath her gentle exterior. He turned his attention back to the window, scanning the darkness beyond. Turner and his men were still out there somewhere, and Samuel had no illusions about what would happen if they found him. But now he had more than just his own life to protect. For the first time in years, Samuel Wright found himself praying not for himself, but for the sleeping woman and the innocent life she carried. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having moved on eastward. Samuel had dozed fitfully by the window, his gun never far from his hand. He woke fully as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the cracks in the boarded windows, illuminating Temperance's sleeping form. While she still slept, Samuel ventured outside to check their surroundings. The rain had left the ground soft, making it easy to spot tracks, but he found none near the cabin. The homestead was situated in a small valley, providing good visibility in all directions. A creek ran behind the property, swollen now from the storm but providing fresh water. When he returned, Temperance was awake, attempting to tidy her appearance despite her limited resources. "Good morning," she greeted him, her voice stronger than it had been the day before. Rest had brought some color back to her cheeks. "Morning," Samuel replied. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you. The baby was active all night. I think he knows things have changed." Samuel asked, raising an eyebrow. Temperance smiled, the expression transforming her face. "Just a feeling. William was convinced we would have a son." Samuel nodded, then set about rekindling the fire. "I'm going to check that root cellar, see if there's anything useful. Then maybe try my hand at catching some fish in the creek." The root cellar yielded some unexpected treasures: jars of preserved vegetables and fruits, a sack of flour that was still good, and even some dried herbs. The previous occupants of the homestead had prepared well before abandoning the place. By midday, they had a proper meal, cooking fish from the creek, potatoes from the cellar, and even bread baking in the small Dutch oven Samuel had found. As they ate, Samuel found himself sharing stories from his own life, tales of cattle drives and frontier towns, of the characters he'd met and the places he'd seen. Temperance listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. "You've lived quite a life, Mr. Wright," she said as he finished a story about a cattle drive through a flash flood. "Samuel," he corrected her. "Seems we're past formalities given our situation." She nodded, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Samuel then, and you should call me Temperance." "That's an unusual name," he observed. "My mother was devoted to the temperance movement," she explained with a small laugh. "She believed strong drink was the root of all evil. My father said she named me thus as a daily reminder to him to stay sober. Did it work? For the most part. Though he did enjoy his whiskey on special occasions, much to her dismay." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of horses approaching. Samuel was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "Get to the root cellar," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "Now." Temperance didn't argue, gathering her shawl and moving as quickly as her condition allowed toward the trap door in the floor. Samuel helped her down the ladder, pressing his revolver into her hand. "If anyone but me opens that door, you shoot," he instructed. "Don't hesitate." Her fingers closed around the gun, her eyes wide but determined. "Be careful," she whispered. Samuel closed the trapdoor, covering it with the rug they'd found, then positioned himself by the window, his rifle at the ready. 2 riders approached the cabin, but to Samuel's relief, neither was Jed Turner or his men. These were strangers, an older man with a gray beard and a younger one who bore a strong resemblance to him, likely father and son. They reined in their horses in the yard, looking around cautiously. "Hello, the house," the older man called. "Anyone home?" Samuel weighed his options. These men could be harmless travelers, or they could be scouts for Turner. Either way, he couldn't risk a confrontation that might endanger Temperance. "State your business," he called back, keeping his rifle visible but not directly aimed. The older man raised his hand slightly, showing he was peaceful. "Name's Harlan Jenkins. This is my son, Daniel. We're looking for my niece, Temperance Wells. Stagecoach she was on was robbed 3 days back. Been searching for survivors." Samuel's grip on his rifle tightened. Could this be true, or was it a trick? "How do I know you're who you say you are?" he demanded. The younger man, Daniel, spoke up. "We got word from Oregon that she was coming. Her cousin Martha wrote to us when the stage didn't arrive on schedule. We've been tracking back along the route." It sounded plausible, but Samuel wasn't taking chances. "Stay where you are," he ordered, then moved to the trapdoor, keeping one eye on the window. He lifted the door slightly. "Temperance," he whispered. "There are 2 men here claiming to be your uncle and cousin, Harlan and Daniel Jenkins. Do you know them?" Temperance's face, visible in the dim light of the cellar, registered shock, then relief. "Yes, they're my mother's brother and nephew." "I didn't know they were in this territory." Samuel helped her up from the cellar, then went to the door, opening it cautiously, his rifle still at hand. "Temperance?" The older man's face lit up with relief as she appeared beside Samuel. "Thank the Lord you're alive." Temperance moved past Samuel toward her relatives, but he noticed she stayed close to him, one hand discreetly returning his revolver. "Uncle Harlan," she said, emotion thick in her voice. "How did you find me?" The reunion that followed confirmed their identities to Samuel's satisfaction. Harlan explained that they'd been living in Silver Creek for the past year, having left Kentucky after Temperance's mother, Harlan's sister, had passed away. "When Martha wrote saying you were coming but never arrived, we feared the worst," Harlan said, his weathered face serious. "There have been reports of stage robberies all through this territory. We've been searching for days." Daniel, who appeared to be in his late 20s, looked at Samuel with open curiosity. "And who might you be, mister?" Before Samuel could answer, Temperance stepped in. "This is Samuel Wright. He saved my life, found me in a church during the storm, and brought me here where it was safer." The gratitude in her uncle's eyes was genuine. "Then we owe you a great debt, Mr. Wright." Samuel shook his head. "Just did what anyone would do," Harlan snorted. "Not in these parts, they wouldn't. There's more wolves than shepherds out here, if you take my meaning." As they talked, Samuel learned that Harlan owned a small ranch outside Silver Creek. They had a proper home, livestock, and most importantly neighbors who could help when Temperance's time came. "You'll come with us, of course," Harlan said to his niece. The matter decided in his mind, Temperance hesitated, glancing at Samuel. "Yes, that would be best," she agreed, though something in her voice suggested reluctance. Samuel felt an unexpected pang at the thought of her leaving. In just a day and night, he'd grown accustomed to her presence, her quiet strength, her gentle faith. But of course she should go with her family, where she and her child would be safe and cared for. "We should leave soon," Daniel said, glancing at the sky. "Make it to the ranch before dark." Preparations were made quickly. Harlan had brought a spare horse which could carry Temperance. Her few possessions were gathered, and Samuel helped her mount, concerned by the pallor of her face. "Are you sure you're well enough to ride?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her hand pressed against her side. "I'll manage. It's not far, is it, Uncle?" 4 hours at an easy pace, Harlan confirmed. "We'll take it slow." Samuel stepped back, suddenly feeling like an outsider. This was her family, her future. His path lay elsewhere. "Thank you, Samuel," Temperance said, looking down at him from the horse. "I won't forget what you did for me." He touched the brim of his hat. "Take care of yourself, Temperance, and that little one." Something unspoken passed between them, a connection that had formed in their brief time together. Then Harlan gave the signal, and the small party began to move away from the cabin. Samuel watched them go, a hollow feeling growing in his chest. Once they were out of sight, he turned back to the cabin, intending to gather his own things before continuing his journey. Turner and his gang were still out there, and Silver Creek was the last place he should go. But as he packed, Samuel found himself thinking of Temperance, her gentle smile, her quiet courage, the way she'd looked at him with trust despite knowing nothing about him. And suddenly, the thought of returning to his solitary life as a drifter held no appeal. Before he could reconsider, Samuel was saddling a horse he'd found in the small barn behind the cabin. Turner be damned, he couldn't let Temperance go without making sure she reached her destination safely. He told himself it was just concern for her welfare, nothing more. But deep down, he knew there was something else drawing him toward Silver Creek, something he wasn't ready to name. The trail was easy to follow, and Samuel caught up with the small party just as the sun was beginning to set. They had stopped to rest by a stream, and Temperance was seated on a fallen log, her face drawn with exhaustion. She looked up as he approached, surprise giving way to what looked suspiciously like joy. "Samuel, what are you doing here?" He dismounted, suddenly feeling foolish. "Thought I'd make sure you got to your uncle's place safely. These trails can be dangerous." Harlan gave him a knowing look but didn't comment, merely nodding in greeting. They continued on together, reaching the Jenkins ranch just as darkness fell. It was a modest but well-maintained property, a sturdy log house, a barn, corrals for horses and cattle, and fields that had been recently planted. The lights of Silver Creek were visible in the distance, perhaps a mile away. As they approached the house, the door opened, and a woman stepped out, small and plump, with graying hair and a kind face. "Martha," Temperance called, her voice warm with recognition. So this was the cousin she'd been traveling to see. Martha hurried forward to help Temperance down from her horse, exclaiming over her condition and ushering her inside with motherly concern. Samuel hung back, suddenly uncertain of his place. Harlan noticed his hesitation and clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on in, Wright. Any man who helped my niece is welcome at my table." The house was warm and inviting, filled with the smell of cooking and the simple comforts of home. Martha fussed over Temperance, insisting she rest while supper was prepared. Daniel took care of the horses, and Harlan showed Samuel to a wash basin where he could clean up. During the meal, Samuel learned more about the Jenkins family. Harlan was a widower who had moved west with his son and daughter-in-law after the war, seeking a fresh start. Martha was Daniel's wife, not Temperance's cousin, as Samuel had assumed the family connection was through Harlan's late sister, Temperance's mother. "We tried to convince Temperance to come west with us after Sarah died," Harlan explained, "but she just married William and wanted to make a go of it in Kentucky." "William was a good man," Martha added, patting Temperance's hand. "Just had terrible luck, God rest his soul." Temperance's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she nodded in agreement. "He would have been so excited about the baby. He always wanted a large family." The conversation turned to Samuel, with Harlan asking pointed questions about his background and intentions. Samuel answered honestly about his work as a cowboy, his years drifting from ranch to ranch, his current trouble with Turner and his gang. "Jed Turner," Daniel interjected. "Big man, scar across his left cheek," Samuel nodded, surprised. "You know him," Daniel exchanged a look with his father. "He's been causing trouble around Silver Creek for months. Sheriff can't seem to catch him at anything, but everyone knows he's behind the stage robberies." "And worse," Harlan added darkly. "2 ranchers who stood up to him ended up dead accidents, supposedly, but nobody's fooled." The news was troubling. If Turner was operating in this area, it put not only Samuel but potentially the Jenkins family at risk, especially if Turner discovered Samuel's connection to them. "I should move on," Samuel said, setting down his fork. "My being here could bring danger to your doorstep." "Nonsense," Harlan said firmly. "We don't scare easy and we don't turn away friends in need. You'll stay here tonight at least." Before Samuel could argue further, Temperance suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Martha was at her side instantly, her expression concerned. "Is it time?" she asked quietly. Temperance nodded, her face pale. I think so. The pains have been coming all day, but now they're stronger. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Martha and Harlan helped Temperance to the bedroom, while Daniel rode to town to fetch the midwife. Samuel found himself pacing the small parlor, feeling utterly useless as the sounds of Temperance's labor reached him from behind the closed door. The midwife arrived shortly before midnight, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Blackburn, who shooed the men outside without ceremony. "Nothing you can do in there but faint," she told Samuel bluntly when he tried to explain his concern. "Best thing for the mother is knowing her men are safe and sound and not underfoot." So Samuel found himself sitting on the porch with Harlan and Daniel, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, listening to the occasional cry from within the house. "First babies often take their time," Harlan said, trying to be reassuring. "My Sarah was in labor for nearly 2 days with Daniel." This was not the comforting thought Harlan intended it to be. Samuel couldn't bear the idea of Temperance suffering for so long. As dawn approached, the door finally opened and Martha appeared, her face tired but radiant. "It's a boy," she announced. "Healthy and strong with a fine set of lungs." Harlan and Daniel whooped with joy, but Samuel found himself frozen, overwhelmed by a rush of emotion he hadn't expected. Relief, yes, but also something deeper, more profound. "She's asking for you," Martha said to Samuel, her eyes kind but knowing. "Both mother and child are doing well." Samuel entered the house hesitantly, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair in a futile attempt to make himself presentable. Martha led him to the bedroom door, then discreetly withdrew, leaving him to enter alone. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp. Temperance lay in the bed, propped up on pillows, her copper hair loose around her shoulders, damp with perspiration. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as Samuel entered, a tired smile lighting her face. "Samuel, come meet William." He moved to the bedside, his throat tight with emotion. The baby was tiny, red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and tightly closed eyes. One little fist had escaped the blanket and was waving slightly in the air. "He's perfect," Samuel said, his voice rough. Temperance's smile deepened. "Would you like to hold him?" Before he could answer, she was already placing the infant in his arms. Samuel took the child carefully, terrified of doing something wrong, of harming this precious new life. The baby's eyes opened briefly dark blue, unfocused, then closed again as he settled into Samuel's embrace. "I've been thinking," Temperance said softly. "William Samuel Wells has a fine sound to it, don't you think?" Samuel looked up from the baby's face, stunned. "You'd name him after me." "If you hadn't found me in that church, neither of us might be here now," she said simply. "It seems fitting to honor the man who saved our lives." Something shifted in Samuel's heart then, a piece falling into place that he hadn't known was missing. This woman, this child, they had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead, the desire for connection, for belonging, for a place to call home. But he was a drifter with enemies on his trail, with nothing to offer a woman like Temperance or her newborn son. And she was a recent widow, vulnerable, grateful. It would be wrong to mistake that gratitude for deeper feelings. "It's an honor I don't deserve," he said finally, carefully returning little William to his mother's arms. "But I'm grateful nonetheless." Temperance looked at him with those clear green eyes that seemed to see right through him. "You deserve more than you know, Samuel Wright." Before he could respond, Mrs. Blackburn returned, shooing him out so Temperance could rest. Samuel retreated to the porch, his mind and heart in turmoil. For the next week, Samuel remained at the Jenkins ranch, telling himself it was only until he was sure Temperance and the baby were out of danger. He made himself useful mending fences, helping with the livestock, keeping watch for any sign of Turner and his men. The ranch hands, initially suspicious of the stranger in their midst, gradually accepted him, especially after he helped break a particularly stubborn horse that had been giving them trouble. Every evening, he spent time with Temperance and little William. The baby was thriving, and Temperance was regaining her strength rapidly. Samuel found himself looking forward to these quiet moments, watching her with her son, occasionally being allowed to hold the infant, who seemed to have taken a liking to him. "He knows you," Temperance said one evening as William gripped Samuel's finger with surprising strength. "Babies have a sense about people, my mother always said." Samuel looked down at the child, a surge of protectiveness washing over him. He's going to be strong like his mother. Temperance smiled, but there was a shadow in her eyes. I've been wondering what kind of life I can give him, a widow with no property, no skills beyond keeping house. You have family here, Samuel reminded her. Your uncle won't let you want for anything, I know, and I'm grateful. But I don't want to be dependent forever. William deserves a mother who can stand on her own 2 feet. Samuel understood her pride, her desire for independence. It was one of the things he admired most about her. You'll find your way, he said with certainty. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Temperance Wells. The look she gave him then surprised, pleased, something else he couldn't name made his heart beat faster. As the days passed, Samuel found more and more reasons to delay his departure. There was always another chore that needed doing, another day of watching William grow, another evening of conversation with Temperance that lasted well into the night. They talked of everything her childhood in Kentucky, his years in the war, their hopes and fears for the future. Samuel found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced to another soul, and Temperance listened without judgment, offering her own perspective with gentle wisdom. It was during one such conversation, sitting on the porch as the sun set, that Harlan joined them, his expression grave. Just got word from town, he said without preamble. Turner and his men were seen at the saloon in Silver Creek. They're asking questions about a tall cowboy with dark hair. Samuel's hand instinctively went to his gun. I should leave, now, before they track me here. Harlan shook his head. Running won't solve it. Turner's got a grudge against half the territory. Sooner or later, he'll cause trouble for this family whether you're here or not. What are you suggesting? Temperance asked, her voice steady despite the fear Samuel could see in her eyes. I'm suggesting we end this, Harlan said grimly. The sheriff's a good man, but he's cautious, needs evidence before he'll move against Turner. But if Turner comes after one of us, makes the first move. You want to use me as bait, Samuel realized. Harlan didn't deny it. Turner wants you. Let him come, but on our terms, with the sheriff and half the men in Silver Creek ready and waiting. It was a dangerous plan, but Samuel saw the logic. If he simply fled, Turner might still take out his frustration on the Jenkins family, especially if he learned they had harbored his quarry. I won't put your family at risk, Samuel said firmly. We're already at risk, Harlan countered. Every honest rancher in this valley is. Turner's been pushing, seeing how far he can go. It's time someone pushed back. Temperance had been silent, but now she spoke, her voice soft but determined. What if there's another way, something that doesn't involve bloodshed? Both men looked at her skeptically. Turner's not a man who can be reasoned with, Samuel said gently. I'm not suggesting reasoning with him, Temperance clarified. But what if we could get him arrested for his other crimes? The stage robberies, the murders Daniel mentioned? Harlan stroked his beard thoughtfully. The sheriff's been trying to pin those on him for months. No witnesses willing to come forward. Because they're afraid, Temperance said. But what if someone from Turner's own gang turned on him? Someone who knew the details of his crimes? Samuel shook his head. Men like that are loyal to whoever pays them or scares them the most. Turner does both. But Temperance was undeterred. At the church, before you found me, I overheard 2 men talking outside. They didn't know I was there. One was complaining about their boss cheating him out of his share from a job, said he had proof hidden away that could send the boss to the gallows. I didn't think much of it at the time, just stayed quiet until they left. Samuel and Harlan exchanged looks of surprise. Did you see these men? Samuel asked intently. Temperance shook her head. It was dark. But one had a distinctive voice, a sort of wheezing quality, like he couldn't catch his breath properly. Whitley, Samuel said immediately. One of Turner's men, always sounds like he's just run a mile, even when he's standing still, has some lung ailment. Harlan's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. If this Whitley has evidence against Turner, we need to find him before Turner realizes he's a threat, Samuel finished. But how? I can't exactly walk into the saloon and ask for him. No, Harlan agreed, but Daniel could. He's known in town, does business there regularly. Wouldn't raise suspicions. The plan took shape quickly. Daniel would go into Silver Creek the next day, locate Whitley, and try to get him alone, perhaps by suggesting he had information about a job that could pay well, but needed to be discussed in private. Once Whitley was separated from the others, Samuel and Harlan would intercept them. and together they would persuade Whitley that his best option was to turn on Turner before Turner turned on him. It was risky, depending on too many variables, but it was better than waiting for Turner to find them or trying to outrun him indefinitely. "I don't like involving Daniel," Temperance said worriedly. "If Turner suspects anything—" "My son can handle himself," Harlan said with quiet pride. "And he knows how to play the part of a man with questionable business to discuss." Samuel wasn't entirely convinced, but he recognized the determination in Harlan's eyes. This was about more than just Samuel's problems now. It was about protecting the Jenkins family, their ranch, and perhaps the entire community from Turner's predations. "If we're going to do this, we need to move fast," he said finally. "Turner won't stay in town long once he realizes I'm not there." That night, unable to sleep, Samuel stood outside, looking up at the stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, everything his life had not been for so many years. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Temperance approaching, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. "William's asleep," she said by way of explanation. "I saw you from the window." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both gazing at the night sky. "Are you afraid?" Temperance asked finally. Samuel considered the question. "Not of Turner," he said honestly. "I've faced worse men." "What then?" He looked at her, at the moonlight silvering her copper hair, at the quiet strength in her face that had drawn him from the first moment in the church. "I'm afraid of what happens after," he admitted. "If this works, if Turner is gone." "You could stay," Temperance said softly, completing his thought. "Here in Silver Creek. A drifter doesn't just stop drifting, Temperance. I don't know how to put down roots." She moved closer, her hand finding his in the darkness. "Perhaps you just need a reason to try." The touch of her hand, small but strong in his, sent warmth spreading through his body despite the cool night air. Samuel looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face, seeing in her eyes an emotion that mirrored what he'd been feeling these past days. "Temperance," he began, not even sure what he wanted to say, but she shook her head, stopping him. "Not now, not with this hanging over us, but when it's done, when you're free of Turner and his threats, then we'll talk about reasons to stay." She squeezed his hand once more, then released it, turning back toward the house. Samuel watched her go, his heart fuller than it had been in years. Morning brought action. Daniel left for town early, dressed as if for business, his manner casual but his eyes alert. Harlan and Samuel followed an hour later, taking a roundabout route to avoid being seen from the main road. They established their position in an abandoned shed at the edge of town, where Daniel was to bring Whitley if he succeeded in separating him from the others. Now all they could do was wait and hope the plan worked. The hours dragged by, the shed growing hot in the midday sun. Samuel checked his revolver for the dozenth time, more from restlessness than necessity. Harlan sat on an upturned crate, whittling a piece of wood with his pocket knife, his face giving away nothing of his thoughts. Just when Samuel was beginning to fear the worst, the sound of voices approached. He and Harlan moved to positions on either side of the door, guns ready but out of sight. "Just through here," Daniel was saying. "Can't be too careful with a proposition like this." "Better be worth my time, Jenkins," came a wheezing reply that confirmed the speaker was indeed Whitley. "I'm taking a risk just talking to you." The door opened and Daniel entered, followed by a thin, sallow-faced man with nervous eyes. Whitley took one look at Samuel and went for his gun, but Harlan was faster, pressing the barrel of his revolver against Whitley's ribs. "Easy now," Harlan said conversationally. "We just want to talk." "Right," Whitley spat, recognition and fear mingling in his face. "Turner's gonna gut you like a fish when he finds you." "That's what we're here to discuss," Samuel said calmly. "Turner's future and yours." It took nearly an hour of careful persuasion, combining threats, promises, and appeals to Whitley's obvious self-interest, before the man began to consider turning on his boss. The proof Temperance had overheard him mention turned out to be a ledger Turner kept of their illegal activities, including names, dates, and his plans for dividing the spoils almost always in his own favor. "He cheats us," Whitley admitted bitterly. "Takes the lion's share and leaves us the scraps, and if anyone complains." He drew a finger across his throat in a graphic gesture. "So why stay with him?" Daniel asked. Whitley shrugged. Safer than crossing him, at least until now. Finally, a deal was struck. Whitley would retrieve the hidden ledger and bring it to the sheriff, along with his testimony about Turner's crimes. In exchange, he would receive immunity for his own involvement and enough money to leave the territory and start fresh elsewhere. "But Turner watches us," Whitley warned. "Especially me, since I'm the newest. He doesn't trust easy." "Then we need a distraction," Samuel said, a plan forming in his mind, "something that will draw Turner's attention completely away from you." "Like what?" Harlan asked, his expression wary. Samuel met his gaze steadily. "Like me." Despite strong objections from both Harlan and Daniel, Samuel insisted that the only way to give Whitley enough time to retrieve the ledger and reach the sheriff was to provide Turner with the target he'd been seeking all along. "I'll show myself in town, make sure Turner sees me," Samuel explained. "When he and his men come after me, Whitley slips away to get the ledger." "And what happens when Turner catches up to you?" Daniel demanded. "You'll be outnumbered 4-1, Samuel smiled grimly. "I don't plan to be caught, just to be chased long enough for Whitley to do his part and for the sheriff to organize his men." It was dangerous, perhaps foolhardy, but no one could suggest a better alternative. The plan was set in motion for that very evening. Samuel would return to the ranch to prepare, while Daniel would escort Whitley back to town with instructions to be ready to move when the time came. Temperance was waiting when Samuel returned, her face taut with worry. William was asleep in her arms, blissfully unaware of the tension around him. "Daniel sent word ahead," she said as soon as Samuel entered. "He said you were planning something reckless." Samuel sighed, sinking into a chair opposite her. There was no point in denying it. "It's the best chance we have of ending this cleanly." "There's nothing clean about violence, Samuel." Her voice was soft but firm. "Surely there's another way. If there was, I'd take it." He leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "I need to end this, Temperance. Not just for my sake, but for yours, for William's, for your family. As long as Turner is out there, none of us is truly safe." She looked down at her sleeping son, then back at Samuel. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back." The emotion in her voice, in her eyes, gave him pause. "I promise," he said solemnly, meaning it more than any vow he'd ever made. "I have a reason to." As the sun began to set, Samuel prepared to leave. He checked his weapons, saddled his horse, and said his goodbyes to Martha and to William, who was awake now and regarding him with solemn blue eyes. Temperance walked with him to the edge of the property, neither speaking until it was time for him to mount up. "Samuel," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something before you go." He turned to her, struck anew by her quiet beauty in the fading light. "What is it?" "When William's father died, I thought I would never feel anything again, that grief had hollowed me out completely," she said, her eyes holding his. "But then you found me in that church, and you've been finding me ever since in ways I can't even explain. You've brought me back to life, Samuel Wright." Before he could respond, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, a gentle, brief kiss that nonetheless sent fire racing through his veins. "That's for luck," she said as she drew back, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "And a promise of more when you return." Samuel touched her face gently, memorizing the feel of her skin beneath his fingertips. "I'll hold you to that, Temperance Wells." Then he mounted his horse and rode toward Silver Creek, her kiss still warming his lips, her words giving him a strength he'd never known before. The main street of Silver Creek was crowded when Samuel arrived, the saloon doing a brisk business as miners, cowboys, and townspeople sought entertainment after a long day's work. He tethered his horse in a visible spot outside the general store, then made his way down the boardwalk, keeping to the shadows but ensuring he was visible enough to be recognized. It didn't take long. He'd barely passed the barber shop when he heard a familiar voice call out from across the street. "Wright, I'll be damned." Jed Turner stood in front of the saloon, flanked by 3 of his men. He was a big man with a bushy beard and cold, calculating eyes. The scar that bisected his left cheek twisted his smile into something ugly. "Evening, Turner," Samuel replied calmly, his hand hovering near his revolver. "Heard you've been looking for me." Turner's eyes narrowed. "You've got nerve showing your face here." "Thought it was time we settled our business," Samuel said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Heard you've been telling folks I stole from you. That's a lie, and we both know it." Turner's face darkened with anger. You calling me a liar, boy, if the boot fits. Samuel deliberately turned his back and began walking away, counting on Turner's pride to make him follow rather than shoot a man in the back in front of witnesses. The ploy worked. Turner and his men started after him, pushing through the onlookers who had stopped to watch the confrontation. Samuel quickened his pace, heading toward the edge of town where his horse waited. He didn't look back, but he could hear Turner shouting for him to stop, the heavy footfalls of multiple men in pursuit. Reaching his horse, Samuel swung into the saddle and spurred the animal forward, glancing back just once to confirm that Turner and his men were following, mounted now as well. In the chaos, he caught a glimpse of Whitley slipping away in the opposite direction. Good, the plan was working. Samuel led them on a chase through the countryside, careful not to outpace them completely, but keeping enough distance to avoid their bullets. The moon was full, providing enough light to navigate the familiar terrain around Silver Creek. He headed toward a canyon where he and Harlan had decided would make a good place for an ambush narrow enough to force Turner's men into single file, with high walls offering good positions for marksmen. Harlan and Daniel would be waiting there, along with 2 ranch hands they trusted. If all went well, the sheriff would join them soon, alerted by Whitley's revelations. As Samuel approached the canyon, he could hear Turner and his men gaining ground, their horses' hooves thundering behind him. He pushed his mount harder, racing into the narrow passage between the towering rock walls. Halfway through, he reined in sharply, dismounting and leading his horse into a hidden crevice where it wouldn't be seen. Then he scrambled up the rocky slope to a ledge where Harlan was waiting, rifle in hand. "Right on schedule," the older man said with grim satisfaction. "Daniel and the others are positioned on the other side, 4 men with rifles against Turner's 4 even odds, and we have the high ground." Samuel nodded, drawing his revolver and checking it one final time. "Any word from town? Did Whitley come through?" "Nothing yet," Harlan admitted, "but it's early still." They didn't have to wait long. The sound of horses entering the canyon echoed off the walls, and soon Turner and his men came into view, moving cautiously now, aware they were entering a potential trap. "Wright," Turner called, his voice bouncing off the canyon walls. "Show yourself, you coward. Or are you going to hide and make us hunt you down?" Samuel glanced at Harlan, who nodded. They had agreed that negotiation was preferable to bloodshed if possible for the law to handle Turner properly. He needed to be alive to stand trial. "I'm here, Turner," Samuel called back, standing up so he could be seen but keeping behind enough cover to avoid being an easy target. "And I'm not alone." Turner looked up, his face contorting with rage when he spotted Samuel. "You think a few rifles are going to scare me off? I've faced worse than you and your farmer friends." "This isn't about scaring you," Samuel replied evenly. "It's about justice. The sheriff's on his way, Turner. Whitley's turned on you, told him everything about the stage robberies, the murders." A flash of uncertainty crossed Turner's face, quickly replaced by bravado. "Whitley's a liar and a drunk. His word against mine won't count for much." "Maybe not," Samuel acknowledged. "But the ledger he gave the sheriff, the one where you kept records of all your crimes, that'll count for plenty." This time, the uncertainty in Turner's expression lingered. He exchanged glances with his men, who were looking increasingly nervous. "He's bluffing," one of them muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. Samuel pressed his advantage. "It's over, Turner. You can surrender now and take your chances with the law, or you can try to shoot your way out and end up dead in this canyon. Your choice." For a moment, it seemed like Turner might actually consider surrender. Then, with a roar of fury, he raised his revolver and fired at Samuel, the bullet splintering the rock near his head. "Kill them all." Turner shouted to his men, and chaos erupted in the canyon. Gunfire echoed off the walls, bullets whizzing through the air. Samuel and Harlan returned fire from their position, while Daniel and the ranch hands opened up from the other side of the canyon, catching Turner's men in a deadly crossfire. One of Turner's men went down immediately, clutching his chest. Another was wounded in the arm, his gun dropping to the ground as he screamed in pain. The third broke and ran, abandoning Turner to save himself. Turner, realizing he was losing, made a desperate move. Spotting Harlan's position, he fired repeatedly, forcing the older man to duck for cover. Then, using the distraction, he spurred his horse directly toward the slope where Samuel was positioned. "Right, this ends now," Turner bellowed, firing again as he approached. Samuel tried to take aim, but Turner was moving too erratically, his horse zigzagging up the rocky slope with surprising agility. Before Samuel could get a clean shot, Turner had reached the ledge, leaping from his horse directly at him. The impact sent both men tumbling, Samuel's revolver knocked from his grip and skittering away across the rocks. Turner was heavier, stronger, and fueled by rage. He landed on top of Samuel, his hands going immediately to his throat. "Should have killed you in Laramie," Turner snarled, his fingers tightening. Samuel struggled, trying to break Turner's grip, but the larger man had him pinned against the rocky ground. Spots began to dance before his eyes as his air was cut off. With his remaining strength, Samuel reached desperately for anything he could use as a weapon. His fingers found a jagged rock and he swung it with all his might at Turner's head, the blow connected with a sickening crack. Turner's grip loosened, his eyes going wide with shock. He slumped sideways, blood streaming from the wound on his temple. Samuel scrambled away, gasping for breath, his throat burning. Turner lay motionless on the ledge, his chest still rising and falling but his eyes closed. "Samuel," Harlan was beside him, helping him to his feet. "Are you hurt?" Samuel shook his head, still unable to speak. Below in the canyon, the gunfire had stopped. Daniel called up that the remaining outlaws had surrendered or fled. "Is he dead?" Harlan asked, looking at Turner's prone form. Samuel checked for a pulse, finding it weak but present. "No, unconscious." "He needs a doctor, though." As if in answer to his words, the sound of multiple horses approaching echoed through the canyon. Samuel and Harlan tensed, raising their weapons, but relaxed when they saw it was the sheriff and several deputies. "Looks like we missed the excitement," the sheriff called up to them as he dismounted. He was a tall, lean man with a graying mustache and shrewd eyes. "Whitley told us where to find you, brought quite a story with him and that ledger you mentioned." The aftermath was a blur of explanations, testimonies, and medical attention for the wounded, including Turner, who was taken into custody still unconscious but alive to face justice for his crimes. By the time Samuel and the Jenkins men returned to the ranch, dawn was breaking over the eastern hills. They were exhausted, dirty, and in Samuel's case, bearing the bruises of his fight with Turner, but victorious. Temperance was waiting on the porch, William in her arms, her face lighting up with relief when she saw Samuel riding alongside her uncle and cousin. She hurried down the steps to meet them as they dismounted. "You're hurt," she said immediately, noticing the darkening marks on Samuel's neck. "It looks worse than it is," he assured her, his voice still rough. "Turner's in custody along with what's left of his gang. The sheriff has the evidence he needs to see them all hang." Temperance's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Then it's over," Samuel nodded, taking her free hand in his. "It's over. We're safe now." The week that followed was one of recovery and decisions. The town of Silver Creek celebrated the downfall of Turner and his gang, with many coming forward to share stories of intimidation and abuse they'd suffered at the outlaws' hands. The sheriff praised Samuel and the Jenkins family for their courage, and the territorial judge arrived to begin proceedings against Turner and his captured men. For Samuel, though, the most important conversations happened in the quiet moments at the ranch, sitting on the porch with Temperance, watching the sunset while William slept in his cradle nearby. "What will you do now?" Temperance asked him one evening, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Samuel covered her hand with his own. "That depends on you," he said honestly, her eyes widened slightly. "On me. I've been a drifter for so long, Temperance. Moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots or form attachments. It was easier that way, after the war less painful than caring and losing, like I'd lost so many comrades." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But then I found you in that church and everything changed. For the first time in years, I found myself wanting to stay, wanting to build something lasting." Temperance's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "What are you saying, Samuel?" He took both her hands in his. "I'm saying that I love you, Temperance Wells, you and William both. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days proving that love to you." A single tear traced its way down her cheek. "Samuel, William's father has only been gone less than a year. I don't know if I'm ready." I'm not asking for an immediate answer, Samuel said gently. Just a chance to court you properly, to show you what kind of man I can be for you and for your son. Temperance was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. I've developed feelings for you too, Samuel, she admitted finally. Feelings I wasn't expecting to have again so soon. It frightens me a little how quickly they've grown. We can take it slow, Samuel promised. I'm not going anywhere, she smiled then, squeezing his hands. I would like that, to see where these feelings lead us with time. It was enough for now. More than Samuel had dared to hope for when he'd first spotted her sleeping form in that abandoned church. The courtship that followed was careful, respectful of Temperance's status as a recent widow and her responsibilities as a mother. Samuel moved into a small cabin on the Jenkins property, helping with the ranch work and proving himself a valuable addition to the operation. He spent time each day with Temperance and William, watching with wonder as the baby grew and developed, taking his first tentative steps, speaking his first words. Samuel found in himself a patience and gentleness he hadn't known he possessed, reading stories to William, crafting simple toys for him, teaching him the names of the animals on the ranch. With Temperance, he shared long walks, quiet conversations, and gradually tender moments of physical affection, a touch of hands, a kiss on the cheek, and eventually, when the time felt right for both of them, deeper kisses that spoke of the growing love between them. Harlan watched their developing relationship with approval, telling Samuel privately that he'd never seen his niece so happy, not even in the early days of her marriage to William. Some might say it's too soon, the older man acknowledged, but life out here is too short and too hard to waste time worrying about what others might think. If you love her and she loves you, that's all that matters. 6 months after the confrontation with Turner, Samuel took Temperance on a special outing, a picnic by the creek that ran through the Jenkins property. William, now a sturdy toddler of 15 months, played nearby, fascinated by the butterflies that flitted among the wildflowers. I have something for you, Samuel said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box carved with intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. He'd worked on it in secret for weeks, wanting it to be perfect. Temperance took it with a curious smile, opening it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a ring, a simple gold band set with a single small diamond that caught the sunlight and scattered it in rainbows. It was my mother's, Samuel explained. The only thing of hers I kept after she passed. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to. Temperance looked up at him, her green eyes bright with emotion. Samuel, Temperance Wells, he said, taking her hand in his, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You and William have given me a home, a purpose, a family. I love you both more than I ever thought possible. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? She looked at the ring, then at William playing contentedly nearby, and finally back at Samuel, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Yes, she said simply, and it was enough. They were married in the same church where Samuel had found her that stormy night, now repaired and with a new pastor. The entire community of Silver Creek turned out for the ceremony, along with ranchers from the surrounding area and cowboys from the cattle drives that passed through the region. William, dressed in his Sunday best, was held by Martha during the ceremony, his solemn blue eyes watching as his mother and the man who had become his father in all but name exchanged their vows. I found you once, sleeping in a church, and promised you'd wake somewhere safer, Samuel said as part of his vows, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed building. Today, I promise to be that safe place for you and William for all the days of our lives. Temperance's response was equally moving. You found me when I was lost, protected me when I was vulnerable, and loved me when I thought love had passed me by. I vow to cherish that love and return it 100-fold for as long as we both shall live. Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons of Wyoming. Samuel continued to work on the Jenkins ranch, eventually partnering with Harlan to expand the operation. Temperance opened a small school in Silver Creek, teaching the children of ranchers and townspeople alike, with William among her first pupils. A year after their marriage, Temperance gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after her mother. 2 years later, a second son joined their family, James Harlan Wright, named for his great-uncle who had become like a father to Samuel. Through it all, the harsh winters, the demanding work, the occasional troubles that found them, they faced life together, drawing strength from the love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. On the 5th anniversary of the night Samuel found Temperance in the church, they sat together on the porch of their own home built on land adjoining the Jenkins property. William, now 6 and growing tall like his stepfather, was helping his 4-year-old sister catch fireflies in the yard. Baby James was asleep in his cradle inside, his peaceful breathing monitored by the open window. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Temperance asked, her head resting comfortably on Samuel's shoulder. "If you hadn't found me that night." Samuel's arm tightened around her waist. "I try not to. The thought of never knowing you, never having this family, it doesn't bear considering," she smiled, turning her face up to his. "I used to believe William was watching over me from heaven. Now I think he guided you to that church, to us." Samuel kissed her gently. "Then I owe him a debt I can never repay except by loving you and his son the way you deserve to be loved." "You do that every day," Temperance assured him, settling back against his shoulder. They sat in contented silence, watching their children play as the sun set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The wild, dangerous territory that had once seemed so hostile had become home, a place of safety and belonging. For Samuel Wright, the drifter who had found a pregnant woman sleeping in a church and promised her somewhere safer, the journey had led to the one destination he had never expected to find: a family and a love that would last a lifetime.